Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you will discover ancient teachings that reveal the deepest secret of mental freedom, how to empty your mind not through force or struggle, but through understanding the profound wisdom that Zen masters have cultivated for thousands of years. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share carefully chosen stories that unlock one of Buddhism's most transformative revelations: that an empty mind isn't a vacant mind, but the most natural, peaceful state of awareness possible. Each tale contains powerful insights that can completely transform your relationship with racing thoughts, mental overwhelm, and the exhausting effort to control your inner experience. These aren't ordinary stories about relaxation. They're preserved teachings from masters who discovered something incredible about the nature of mind itself: that the mental quiet you're seeking isn't achieved by stopping thoughts, but by recognizing the vast, open awareness in which all thoughts naturally arise and dissolve. As we journey through these remarkable teachings together, you'll notice something extraordinary begin to happen. The constant mental chatter that usually fills your head will start to naturally quiet. The struggle to control your thoughts will begin to dissolve. You'll discover the profound rest that comes when you stop fighting your mind and start understanding its deeper nature. So settle in completely now. Let your body sink into whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, prepare to receive timeless wisdom about emptying your mind that has been waiting centuries for you to discover it. Let us now explore a story about the effortless nature of true emptiness. In a peaceful fishing village by a winding river, Master Bankei sat in quiet contemplation beneath the shade of an old willow tree. The morning sun cast dancing patterns through the leaves as fishermen cast their nets into the clear water. The sound of gentle waves lapping against the shore created a natural rhythm that seemed to slow time itself. A weathered fisherman approached the master, his face etched with frustration. "Master," he said, bowing respectfully, "my mind torments me like a slippery eel. The harder I try to catch my thoughts and make them still, the more they slip through my fingers. I struggle day and night to empty this restless mind. But the more effort I make, the more agitated I become. Please, show me the way to true emptiness." Bankei gazed at the man with compassionate understanding, then noticed a hollow gourd floating peacefully on the water's surface. With a gentle gesture, he pointed to the simple vessel bobbing effortlessly in the current. "Tell me, friend," he said softly, "what great effort does this gourd make to be empty? What tremendous struggle does it undergo to contain nothing but air and space?" The fisherman followed the master's gaze and watched the gourd drift silently with the flow of the river. After a long moment, he replied, "It makes no effort at all, master. It simply is empty. The gourd doesn't fight to achieve emptiness. It naturally contains space within its walls." Bankei smiled, his eyes twinkling with gentle wisdom. "Then tell me, why do you work so hard to become what you already are? Why do you struggle to achieve what is your most fundamental nature?" The fisherman stared at the floating gourd, and something shifted in his understanding. The very effort to force emptiness was what filled his mind with struggle. In that moment of recognition, his restless seeking quieted, and he experienced the natural spaciousness that had always been present beneath his mental grasping. The Buddha once said, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This ancient wisdom illuminates the paradox at the heart of spiritual practice. We exhaust ourselves trying to achieve a state of emptiness that is already our fundamental nature, like the gourd that doesn't struggle to be hollow. Why do we make such tremendous effort to become empty when emptiness is our original condition? Zen Buddhism points to our deeply ingrained habit of doing rather than being. We've been conditioned to believe that all meaningful change requires effort, struggle, and achievement. This works well for external accomplishments, but when applied to inner transformation, it often creates the very obstacles we're trying to overcome. The mind that tries to empty itself is like someone digging a hole to find space. The very act of digging creates more dirt, more disturbance, more complexity. Each thought about achieving emptiness adds another layer of mental activity. Each effort to stop thinking generates more thoughts about the process of stopping thoughts. Consider how this pattern manifests in your daily meditation practice. You sit down with the intention to quiet your mind, but then notice how active your thoughts are. This noticing creates commentary. I'm thinking too much. I should be calmer by now. Why is this so difficult? Each of these thoughts is like trying to smooth water with your hand. The very action creates more ripples. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the truth that enlightenment isn't something we attain through effort, but something we recognize as already present. The gourd doesn't become empty. It reveals its essential nature when we look clearly at what it actually is. The fisherman's eel-like thoughts represent our habitual relationship with mental phenomena. We chase after thoughts to catch them, hold them, examine them, or push them away. But thoughts, like eels, become more elusive the more we grasp at them. When we stop chasing and simply observe, we discover that thoughts arise and pass away naturally in the space of awareness, like waves appearing and dissolving in the ocean. This doesn't mean we become passive or stop engaging with life. The gourd is empty, yet it serves its function perfectly, carrying water when needed and floating freely when not. Our natural emptiness allows us to respond appropriately to each moment without the accumulated burden of endless mental resistance. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between the space of awareness and the contents that arise within it. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations are like clouds passing through the vast sky of consciousness. The sky doesn't effort to push clouds away or struggle to remain clear. It simply provides the open space in which all weather patterns can arise and dissolve. Tonight, as you notice the familiar pattern of trying to control or improve your mental state, remember the floating gourd. Can you rest in the recognition that your essential nature is already the spacious awareness you seek? Can you allow thoughts to arise and pass away like ripples on water, without adding the extra layer of effort to make them different? As the Buddha taught, nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded, but once mastered, nothing can help you as much as your own thoughts. The mastery he speaks of isn't control through force, but recognition of the natural emptiness in which all thoughts appear and disappear. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about expression beyond words. At a vibrant village festival filled with colorful lanterns and the scent of incense, Master Hakuin walked among the celebration when the rhythmic beating of drums drew his attention. Following the sound, he discovered a drummer whose playing was so captivating that crowds had gathered in silent amazement, their faces lit with wonder. The drummer moved with fluid grace, his body swaying in perfect harmony with each beat. His face radiated pure joy and concentration, completely absorbed in the music flowing through him. What made this scene even more remarkable was that the drummer had been born without the ability to speak. He lived in a world of eternal silence, yet created the most eloquent rhythm anyone had ever heard. A curious student approached Hakuin, puzzled by what he witnessed. "Master, how can someone who cannot make words create such perfect music? How does someone locked in silence produce sounds that speak to everyone's heart?" Hakuin observed the drummer for several moments, noting the man's complete presence and the way he seemed to disappear entirely into the rhythm. During a break in the performance, the master approached the drummer with gentle gestures, asking through signs why his drumming touched people so deeply. The drummer's eyes lit up with understanding. He smiled and pointed first to his throat, acknowledging his inability to speak. Then he touched his head and made a sweeping motion, as if clearing something away. Finally, he picked up his drumsticks and began to play on an imaginary drum, making no actual sound, yet moving with such precision and grace that the watching crowd could almost hear the phantom rhythm pulsing through the air. "You see," Hakuin told his student, his voice filled with appreciation, "this man cannot fill his mind with the constant chatter of words. So his body speaks the deeper language that exists before thoughts form. He empties himself so completely into the drum that there is no drummer left, only pure drumming, no separation between player and played, between silence and sound." The student watched with new eyes as the drummer resumed his performance, noticing how the man's eyes remained closed and his face reflected complete peace, as if he had dissolved entirely into the rhythm itself, becoming one with the music that flowed through him. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, silence is not silent. Silence speaks. It speaks most eloquently. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding how emptiness enables the most authentic expression. The mute drummer's limitation becomes his greatest strength, revealing how the absence of one form of communication opens space for a deeper, more universal language. Why do we often struggle to express our deepest truths? Buddhist psychology explains that our constant internal dialogue creates interference with authentic expression, like radio static that drowns out a clear signal. Our mental commentary, self-consciousness, and need to find the right words often block the natural flow of creativity and genuine communication. The drummer's silence isn't a limitation, it's a doorway to pure expression. Without the option of verbal explanation or the habit of mental rehearsal, he must communicate directly from the source of his being. His body becomes a clear channel for rhythm, unfiltered by the mind's tendency to analyze, judge, or modify the creative impulse. Consider how this applies to your own moments of creative expression. Whether you're speaking to a loved one, writing, painting, or simply moving through your day, notice how often you're simultaneously doing the activity and commenting on it internally. Am I saying this right? How do I look? Will they understand? Is this good enough? These mental voices create a layer of separation between you and direct experience. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi spoke of beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh openness rather than preconceived ideas about how things should unfold. The drummer embodies this perfectly. Each beat emerges fresh from silence, uncolored by previous thoughts about what the rhythm should be, or concerns about how it will be received. This points to a profound teaching about the relationship between emptiness and fullness. The drummer's mind, empty of verbal chatter, becomes full of rhythm. His silence creates space for the most eloquent communication. In Zen aesthetics, this principle appears everywhere. The empty space in a painting that gives life to the brushstrokes, the pause in conversation that allows deeper understanding, the silence between musical notes that creates melody. In our media-saturated world, we often equate communication with constant output, more words, more information, more explanation. But the drummer reveals the power of what the Japanese call ma, the pregnant pause, the meaningful emptiness that allows authentic expression to emerge. This isn't about becoming literally mute, but about finding moments of internal silence that allow our deeper truth to surface. When we stop filling every moment with mental noise, space opens for intuition, creativity, and genuine response to arise naturally. Tonight, as you engage in conversation or creative activity, can you experiment with small moments of internal silence? Can you allow responses to emerge from stillness rather than from the habitual rush to fill space with words or actions? Perhaps you'll discover that your most authentic expression arises not from thinking about what to say, but from the empty space where thinking stops. As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The drummer's soundless rhythm reminds us that the most profound communication often emerges from the deepest silence. Let us now turn to a story about the hidden wisdom in repetitive action. In a remote mountain monastery where morning mist clung to ancient pine trees, there lived a monk whose singular duty was sweeping the stone courtyard. For 30 years, visitors had watched him follow the same meditative pattern. Beginning at dawn, he would sweep each stone, each corner, each pathway with identical care and attention. The monk moved with unhurried grace, his worn wooden broom creating soft whispers against the stones. Whether autumn leaves covered the ground or spring petals danced in the breeze, he approached each day's sweeping with the same peaceful concentration, as if encountering the task for the first time. One morning, a scholar renowned for his philosophical learning arrived at the monastery. He had studied in great universities and libraries, accumulating vast knowledge about Buddhist texts and theories. As he watched the aging monk methodically sweeping, a look of superiority crossed his face. "Old man," the scholar called out with obvious disdain. "After 30 years of sweeping the same courtyard, surely you know where the dirt accumulates. Why do you waste time sweeping areas that are already clean? Haven't you learned anything from all this repetition?" The monk paused in his sweeping, leaning gently on his broom handle. His weathered face remained serene as he looked at the young scholar with eyes that held decades of quiet understanding. "Young friend," he replied softly, "after 30 years, I have discovered that there is no dirt to sweep, no broom to hold, and no one here to do the sweeping. Yet somehow, mysteriously, the courtyard remains perfectly clean. Without any trace of pride or defensiveness, he resumed his sweeping. The scholar noticed that despite the monk's seemingly paradoxical words, not a single fallen leaf remained out of place, and the stones gleamed with a subtle radiance that spoke of years of loving attention. As the Buddha observed, if you want to know your mind, sit in meditation. If you want to tame your mind, get up and work. What emerges from this story is the profound teaching that true emptiness isn't found by abandoning activity, but by engaging so completely that the sense of a separate doer dissolves. Why do we often view repetitive tasks as meaningless drudgery? Modern culture has trained us to value novelty, achievement, and measurable progress above all else. We dismiss routine activities as beneath our intelligence, seeing them as obstacles to more important pursuits. This perspective misses the transformative potential hidden within simple, repeated actions. The scholar represents our achievement-oriented mind that constantly seeks to optimize, improve, and move beyond current circumstances. This mind asks, what's the point? How can I make this more efficient? When will I be done with this level and move to something more significant? But this very attitude prevents us from discovering the depth available in each moment of engagement. Zen Buddhism teaches that enlightenment isn't found by transcending ordinary activities, but by entering them so completely that the boundaries between self and action dissolve. The sweeping monk embodies what the Japanese call shoshin, beginner's mind, approaching the same task with fresh awareness rather than mechanical habit. Consider your own relationship with routine activities. When you wash dishes, do laundry, or commute to work, where is your attention? Often, we're physically present but mentally elsewhere, treating these moments as time to endure rather than opportunities for presence. We sweep our floors while thinking about weekend plans, wash dishes while rehearsing tomorrow's meetings. The monk's wisdom reveals that when we bring complete attention to any activity, something extraordinary happens. The sense of being a separate person doing a task begins to fade, replaced by a flowing unity of awareness and action. This isn't mere philosophy. It's a lived experience available in any moment of total engagement. Master Dogen taught, when you walk, just walk. When you sit, just sit. Don't wobble. This instruction points to the profound ordinariness of awakening. We don't need special circumstances or exotic practices. The monastery courtyard becomes a perfect temple when approached with complete presence. The scholar's question reveals our culture's obsession with productivity and learning in terms of accumulating information or skills. But the monk demonstrates a different kind of learning, the gradual dissolution of the illusion that there's someone separate from the activity doing it. After 30 years, the sweeping has swept away the sweeper. This doesn't mean the monk has become passive or unconscious. Notice that the courtyard remains immaculately clean, suggesting precision and care beyond what mere mechanical effort could achieve. When the sense of effortful doing relaxes, action becomes more effective, not less. In Zen monasteries, work practice is considered as valuable as formal meditation. Sweeping, cooking, gardening, all become opportunities to dissolve the artificial boundary between spiritual practice and daily life. The monk's broom becomes his meditation cushion, each stroke a moment of complete presence. Tonight, as you engage in some simple, routine activity, perhaps brushing your teeth, preparing food, or tidying your space? Can you experiment with complete presence? Can you release the mind's tendency to be elsewhere and discover what happens when you fully inhabit the task at hand? You might find that in moments of total engagement, the questioner and the questioned disappear, leaving only the pure activity itself. As the Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The monk's 30 years of sweeping light, countless moments of presence, each stroke a candle illuminating the ordinary magic of complete attention. Now, let us explore a Zen story about learning from silence itself. High in the misty mountains where ancient peaks touch the sky, a restless student made the arduous climb to find the hermit master Tokusan. He had heard stories of the master's profound wisdom and traveled for days through treacherous paths, driven by an urgent hunger for teaching and understanding. The student's mind raced with anticipation as he navigated rocky trails and steep slopes. He had prepared countless questions about meditation, enlightenment, and the nature of reality. His backpack was heavy with Buddhist texts he hoped to discuss, and his heart was full of expectations about the profound teachings he would receive. After hours of searching through bamboo groves and along narrow ridges, he finally discovered the master sitting in perfect stillness, facing a blank rock wall. Tokusan sat so motionlessly that he seemed to have become part of the mountain itself, his presence both utterly ordinary and mysteriously profound. "Master," the student called out, breathing heavily from his climb and bowing respectfully. "I have traveled far and endured great hardship to learn from you. Please teach me the secret of emptying my mind. I am ready to receive your wisdom." Tokusan didn't turn around. He continued facing the plain rock wall as if the student hadn't spoken. Hours passed. The morning mist lifted, revealing the vast mountain landscape, but still the master remained motionless, gazing at the unremarkable stone surface. The student's initial patience gradually transformed into confusion, then frustration, then irritation. He had expected dialogues about deep philosophical matters, not this seemingly endless silence. "Master!" he finally burst out, his voice echoing off the rock walls. "I've been waiting for hours. Please, I'm here to learn. When will you begin teaching me?" Still facing the wall, Tokusan spoke quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "This rock has been teaching you for hours. Why haven't you been listening? Every moment, it has been offering you exactly what you came here to find." The student stared at the rock in bewilderment, his mind spinning with confusion. "But master, rocks can't speak. How can a stone wall teach anything? It just sits there doing nothing." "Exactly," replied Tokusan, still not turning around. "When you can hear what this rock has been saying all morning, you'll understand what an empty mind sounds like. When you can receive its teaching, you'll know what you came here to learn." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "If you want to know your mind, sit in meditation. If you want to know the world's mind, listen to silence." This tale unveils the profound teaching that the greatest wisdom often comes not from words or explanations, but from direct encounter with stillness itself. Why do we struggle to learn from silence when it offers the most direct teaching available? Our educational conditioning has trained us to equate learning with receiving information, explanations, and verbal instruction. We expect teachers to fill our minds with concepts, techniques, and answers. But Zen points to a different kind of learning, one that happens through direct experience rather than intellectual accumulation. The student's restless seeking represents our habitual approach to spiritual growth. We travel great distances, both literally and metaphorically, looking for someone to give us what we imagine we lack. We collect teachings, attend workshops, read books, hoping to find the final piece of information that will unlock understanding. But this very seeking often prevents us from recognizing what's already present. The rock wall embodies what Zen calls original nature, the basic awareness that exists before thoughts, concepts, and seeking arise. It simply is, without agenda, without trying to be anything other than what it is. It doesn't effort to be wise or enlightened. It doesn't seek to improve itself or achieve special states. This effortless being is exactly what the student came to learn, yet he can't recognize it because it doesn't match his expectations. Master Bankei taught, "You are all perfectly unborn Buddhas. Simply stop doubting." The rock demonstrates this unborn nature perfectly. It has never not been exactly what it is. It doesn't wonder if it's enlightened enough or worry about its spiritual progress. This natural state of being, before the mind complicates it with seeking and dissatisfaction, is what Zen practice points toward. Consider how often you seek teachings or experiences to fix your mind or achieve special states of consciousness. Notice the assumption that wisdom must come from outside yourself, through special practices or exotic experiences. The rock wall suggests that what you're seeking is actually the natural state of awareness itself, the simple presence that exists right now, reading these words. The student's inability to hear the rock reveals how our conceptual mind filters experience. We divide reality into categories: meaningful and meaningless, spiritual and ordinary, teaching and non-teaching. But the rock offers the most fundamental teaching: how to simply be present without agenda, without the need to be anywhere else or achieve anything different. In Zen temples, students often sit facing blank walls for hours or even years. This practice, called shikantaza or just sitting, isn't about achieving any particular state, but about learning to rest in awareness itself. The wall becomes a mirror, reflecting back the student's own restless seeking and gradually revealing the peace that exists when seeking stops. Dogen Zenji said, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The rock wall teaches this forgetting, not through explanation, but through its own example of existence, without self-consciousness or spiritual ambition. Tonight, as your mind fills with thoughts about tomorrow's responsibilities or ongoing concerns, can you remember the teaching of the silent rock? Can you find a moment to simply be present without trying to achieve, improve, or understand anything? Perhaps you'll discover that the peace you seek isn't hidden in complex teachings, but available in the simple recognition of awareness itself. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within, do not seek it without. The rock wall points us home to this inner silence, not as an achievement, but as our most natural state, always present beneath the mind's constant searching. Our next story is about capturing the essence of what cannot be grasped. In a serene monastery garden, where morning light filtered through delicate bamboo leaves, Master Seshu sat peacefully with brush in hand, painting with the focused attention of decades of practice. His movements were fluid and precise, each stroke emerging from deep stillness and returning to quietude. A young artist who had heard of the master's legendary paintings approached with eager anticipation. He had traveled from the bustling city, carrying his own brushes and paints, hoping to learn the techniques that made Seshu's work so profound. The young man had studied with many teachers, mastering various styles and methods, yet something essential remained elusive in his own artistic expression. "Master," the young artist said, bowing respectfully as he watched Seshu's brush dance across the rice paper, "your paintings capture the very essence of emptiness itself. They breathe with life while containing nothing solid. What is your secret? What technique allows you to paint with such spiritual depth?" Seshu continued painting without looking up, his brush moving with the natural rhythm of breathing. The bamboo taking shape on the paper seemed to sway with invisible wind, its leaves appearing to whisper ancient secrets. "I paint only what isn't there," he replied quietly, his voice carrying the same gentle authority as his brushstrokes. The young artist leaned closer, studying the emerging painting with confused intensity. "I don't understand, Master. You're clearly painting bamboo. I can see the stalks, the leaves, the delicate joints. How can you say you're painting what isn't there?" Seshu lifted his brush from the paper and held the painting up to catch the morning light. The bamboo appeared complete, yet somehow the empty spaces between the stalks seemed more alive and present than the painted elements themselves. The white areas of unpainted paper weren't merely background, they pulsed with energy and movement, creating the very essence of the bamboo grove. "Most painters," Seshu explained with gentle patience, "fill the emptiness with bamboo. They focus on adding more detail, more color, more defined form. But I use bamboo to paint the emptiness. The bamboo you see is just an excuse for the space to reveal itself. The true subject of the painting is what exists between the brush strokes." He handed the brush to the young artist, his eyes twinkling with warm encouragement. "Now you try. But remember, don't paint the bamboo. Let the bamboo paint the nothing. Allow the emptiness to use your brush to make itself visible." The young artist took the brush with trembling hands, suddenly understanding that he had been approaching art and perhaps life itself from entirely the wrong direction. The Buddha understood that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. This ancient wisdom shows us that true artistry, like true living, emerges not from adding more but from revealing what was always present. The master painter doesn't create beauty. He uncovers it by removing everything that obscures its natural expression. Why do we habitually try to fill emptiness rather than honor it? Our culture conditions us to equate value with accumulation, meaning with complexity, and success with addition. We believe that the more we add, more details, more explanations, more achievements, more possessions, the more complete and fulfilled we'll become. But Seshu's painting reveals the opposite. True mastery often lies in knowing what to leave out. The young artist represents our common approach to creativity and life. We focus on the forms, the techniques, the methods, the content, while missing the spaces that give those forms meaning. In music, the silence between notes creates rhythm. In architecture, the empty space inside walls creates rooms. In relationships, The comfortable silences create intimacy. Yet, we typically attend to the notes, the walls, and the words, while ignoring the essential emptiness that makes them meaningful. This principle extends far beyond artistic creation. Consider how you approach problem solving. Do you try to add more analysis, more options, more considerations? Or can you sometimes find solutions by removing complications, simplifying your approach, and creating space for clarity to emerge naturally? Zen calligraphy masters speak of one mind, one brush, one stroke. This doesn't mean painting carelessly, but rather allowing each mark to emerge from the same source of emptiness that Sesshu describes. When the painter's ego mind steps aside, the brush moves with natural spontaneity, guided by a wisdom deeper than technique. The master's instruction to let the bamboo paint the nothing points to a profound shift in creative consciousness. Instead of you painting the bamboo, you become a clear channel through which the essential nature of bamboo expresses itself. This requires letting go of preconceived ideas about what the painting should look like and trusting the natural intelligence that flows through empty awareness. Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Most artists become so focused on their mental concepts of bamboo that they miss the living essence standing before them. Sesshu suggests painting from direct perception rather than accumulated ideas. This teaching applies to every aspect of life. In conversation, can you listen to the silence between words, where understanding actually lives? In decision-making, can you access the space between thoughts, where wisdom naturally arises? In relationships, can you appreciate the emptiness that allows love to flow, rather than trying to fill every moment with activity or explanation? The Japanese aesthetic principle of ma, meaningful emptiness, appears throughout their art forms. The pause in poetry that allows deeper meaning to resonate. The empty corner in a room that creates a sense of spaciousness. The single flower arrangement that honors the beauty of simplicity over abundance. Tonight, as you engage in any creative activity, whether cooking, writing, arranging your living space, or simply having a conversation, can you experiment with Sesshu's approach? Can you focus less on what you're adding and more on the space you're creating? Perhaps you'll discover that your most authentic expression emerges not from filling emptiness, but from allowing emptiness to fill you. As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The master painter shows us that letting go of techniques, expectations, and the need to fill every space opens the door to expressions of beauty that no amount of addition could achieve. Let us now turn to a tale about the wisdom that can be found in unexpected moments of supposed transgression. This is The Fishbones. In the serene grounds of a mountain monastery, where the morning mist clung to ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells marked the rhythm of contemplative life, a day laborer was going about his routine maintenance work. As he swept beneath the raised wooden floors of the main meditation hall, something unusual caught his eye. Fresh bones from what appeared to be a sea bream, still glistening with traces of the previous night's meal. The worker's heart raced with the significance of his discovery. Fish was strictly forbidden in the monastery. The monastic code was clear about avoiding meat, and these bones represented a serious violation of the community's most fundamental dietary principles. This was scandal, worthy of immediate attention from the highest authority. Clutching the evidence in his weathered hands, the laborer hurried across the temple grounds to find the master. "Master! Master!" he called out, his voice carrying both excitement and moral indignation. "Look what I found under the monk's hall! Fresh fish bones! How embarrassing to have such evidence of rule-breaking turn up here at the temple! What will people think of our community's discipline?" The master, who had been quietly tending to his morning tea, looked up with eyes that held no surprise, no shock, no disappointment. Instead, a gentle smile played across his weathered features as he examined the bones the laborer presented with such righteous concern. "Well, well," the master said, chuckling softly as he turned the bones over in his palm. "The novices nowadays have certainly gotten soft. Back when I was a novice, we never left over even the bones." The worker stood frozen, his mouth agape, unsure whether he had heard correctly. Had the master just confessed to not only knowing about the fish consumption, but to having once consumed fish so thoroughly that no evidence remained? The moral certainty that had driven him to report this violation crumbled in an instant. Buddha's wisdom tells us, the fault of others is easily perceived, but that of oneself is difficult to perceive. This teaching relates profoundly to our human tendency to focus on the perceived failures of others while remaining blind to our own imperfections and the complexity of any situation. This ancient wisdom illuminates how quickly we become intoxicated by moral superiority. The laborer's excitement at discovering evidence of wrongdoing reveals a troubling aspect of human nature, our eagerness to find fault in others, especially when we perceive them as having higher standards or more spiritual authority than ourselves. Why do we derive such satisfaction from discovering the imperfections of those we consider our moral or spiritual superiors? This impulse often stems from what Zen calls comparative mind, the ego strategy for establishing its worth by diminishing others. When we find evidence of their humanity, their mistakes, their moments of weakness, we feel temporarily elevated, as if their fallibility somehow increases our own virtue. The worker rushed to judgment based on appearances, never considering the full context of what he had discovered. Perhaps the fish was donated food that would have been wasted. Perhaps it was medicine prescribed for an ailing monk. Perhaps it represented an act of compassion rather than self-indulgence. His assumption that he understood the complete moral picture from a single piece of evidence reveals the dangerous simplicity of self-righteous thinking. We can observe this same pattern in our daily interactions. How quickly we jump to conclusions about people's motivations based on limited information. A coworker leaves early and we assume laziness, never considering family obligations. A friend doesn't respond to messages and we assume indifference, never considering their personal struggles. A spiritual teacher makes a human mistake and we assume hypocrisy, never considering the full complexity of their situation. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." This wisdom points us toward examining our interpretations and judgments, rather than simply accepting them as accurate reflections of reality. The master's response demonstrates a profound teaching about spiritual authority and humility. Rather than becoming defensive, denying the accusation, or punishing those involved, he used the moment to reveal something deeper about the nature of rules, practice, and human nature itself. His confession that he once consumed fish so completely that no bones remained is both humorous and illuminating. It acknowledges shared humanity while suggesting that true spiritual development might involve growing beyond the need for such rigid external controls. This story also points us toward understanding the difference between the spirit and letter of spiritual practice. Rules and guidelines exist to support our development, but when they become sources of judgment and comparison, they can actually hinder the very growth they were designed to encourage. Beyond this, there emerges another layer of teaching about the nature of evidence and assumption. The worker believed that fish bones proved moral failing, but what if they proved something else entirely? Perhaps the very compassion and non-attachment that the monastery sought to cultivate. Tonight, as you notice yourself quick to judge others based on limited evidence or external appearances, can you pause and consider what you might not be seeing? Can you remember moments when your own actions might have appeared questionable to others who didn't understand the full context? As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. When we meet others' apparent imperfections with judgment and moral superiority, as we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stonecutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stonecutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete. The rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky, gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noblemen and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, He felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. I wish to be a cloud. And so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. A mere rock more powerful than I? I wish to be a rock. Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon, he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. A puny creature more powerful than me. I want to be a man again. And so he found himself once more a stone cutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned, richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. I'll be happy when I get promoted, only to discover new stresses. I'll be content with more money, only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is, while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Let us continue with a story about the limits of understanding and the honesty of not knowing. This is the teaching of the Emperor and Master Gudo. The Emperor of Japan, a man accustomed to receiving definitive answers from his advisors and scholars, had arranged a private audience with Master Gudo, one of the most respected Zen teachers in the realm. The Emperor came with genuine curiosity about spiritual matters, particularly questions about life, death, and what might lie beyond ordinary understanding. Seated in the formal chamber where matters of state were usually discussed, the Emperor felt comfortable posing even the most profound questions to this renowned master. After all, if anyone would possess answers to life's deepest mysteries, surely it would be an enlightened Zen teacher who had spent decades in contemplation and practice. Master Gudo, the Emperor began with the directness that comes from a lifetime of authority. I have a question that has troubled many great minds throughout history. What happens to a man of enlightenment after death? Surely someone of your spiritual attainment would understand such matters. The emperor expected a profound discourse on the nature of consciousness after physical death, perhaps insights into rebirth, karma, or the eternal nature of enlightened awareness. He was prepared to hear about subtle realms, the dissolution of individual consciousness into cosmic unity, or other elevated teachings that would satisfy his curiosity about this ultimate mystery. Instead, Master Gudo looked at the emperor with complete equanimity and gave the most honest answer possible. "How should I know?" The emperor was taken aback. Here was a master revered throughout the land for his wisdom, essentially admitting ignorance about what seemed like a fundamental spiritual question. "But master," the emperor pressed, somewhat incredulous, "you are an enlightened teacher. Surely you must have special knowledge about such things." Gudo's response was immediate and perfectly logical. "Yes, sir, but not a dead one." The simplicity of this exchange contains a profound teaching about the nature of genuine wisdom and the difference between authentic understanding and pretended knowledge. As the Buddha taught, "I know nothing except the fact of my ignorance." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound honesty that characterizes true spiritual maturity, the willingness to admit the limits of one's knowledge, rather than pretending to understand what cannot be known from one's current position. Why do we expect spiritual teachers to have answers to questions that can only be resolved through direct experience? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between conceptual knowledge and lived understanding, between what we can theorize about and what we can actually know. Master Gudo's response wasn't a failure of wisdom, but a demonstration of it. He refused to engage in speculation about experiences he hadn't had, even when pressed by someone in a position of great authority. His honesty revealed more wisdom than any elaborate theory about post-death consciousness could have provided. Consider how often in daily life we pretend to know things we don't actually know. Whether it's offering confident opinions about complex social issues, giving definitive advice about other people's relationships, or claiming certainty about uncertain outcomes, we often feel pressured to appear knowledgeable rather than admitting the limits of our understanding. The emperor's assumption that enlightenment should include knowledge about death reflects a common misconception about spiritual development. We imagine that awakening provides a comprehensive database of cosmic information rather than a fundamental shift in how we relate to not knowing. In Zen practice, we cultivate what Suzuki Roshi called "don't know mind," a state of open awareness that doesn't need to fill every gap in understanding with theories or beliefs. This isn't ignorance, but a wise recognition that direct experience is more valuable than second-hand information. Zen Master Linchi taught, "There is nothing special to do, nothing special to learn." Enlightenment doesn't grant supernatural knowledge about matters beyond ordinary experience. A living master knows about living. What happens after death remains in the realm of speculation until one actually dies. The Buddha said, "Believe nothing merely because you have been told it. But whatsoever, after due examination and analysis, you find to be conducive to the good, the benefit, the welfare of all beings, that doctrine believe and cling to." Even the Buddha encouraged direct investigation over accepting claims based on authority. Gudo's teaching reveals the freedom that comes from releasing the need to have opinions about everything. How much mental energy do we waste constructing theories about things we cannot possibly know? How much suffering comes from worrying about scenarios we can only imagine? Look deeply at your own relationship with not knowing. Where do you pretend certainty to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? What would change if you could say, "I don't know," with the same confidence that Master Gudo displayed. The emperor sought knowledge about death from someone who was vibrantly alive. But true wisdom might be found not in accumulating information about future experiences, but in fully engaging with present reality. The mystery of death is honored not by pretending to solve it, but by living authentically in the face of it. Tonight, as you encounter questions about the future, about others' motivations, or about cosmic mysteries, can you remember Master Gudo's honest simplicity? Can you find the courage to admit when you don't know, discovering that don't know mind might be wiser than all our clever theories? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. In a world full of false certainties and confident ignorance, the Master's honest, "How should I know?" points toward a more genuine relationship with mystery, one that honors what cannot be known, while fully embracing what can be directly experienced. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a teaching about the profound liberation that comes through releasing our attachment to identity. This is the story of a seeker's ultimate discovery. For countless years, a devoted monk has wandered through distant lands, seeking the legendary realm where Buddha himself resides. This quest has consumed his entire adult life, driving him through scorching deserts, over treacherous mountain passes, and across vast plains where few travelers dare venture. Every step has been motivated by an unwavering belief that somewhere beyond the ordinary world lies a perfect place where all suffering ends and ultimate truth becomes directly accessible. His journey has required tremendous sacrifice. He has given up the comfort of a settled home, the security of a steady community, and the simple pleasures that make ordinary life meaningful. His body bears the marks of this extended pilgrimage. Feet hardened by endless walking, skin weathered by exposure to harsh climates, and the lean frame of someone who has often gone without adequate food in pursuit of his spiritual goal. Yet his dedication never wavers. In his mind, every hardship endured brings him closer to the ultimate destination. Every monastery where he stops to rest becomes a stepping stone toward the final teaching. Every master he encounters offers clues that might guide him toward the sacred land where Buddha awaits those worthy of direct instruction. Finally, after decades of searching, the monk receives reliable information about his destination. Travelers speak with certainty about a great river that forms the boundary of Buddha's realm. Beyond this water lies the land he has sought throughout his adult life, where enlightenment itself takes form as a place that can be entered and experienced. When he reaches the river's edge, his heart pounds with anticipation and reverence. The water flows wide and deep, separating him from the culmination of everything he has worked toward. This is the final barrier between his seeking and his ultimate attainment. With prayers on his lips and gratitude flooding his being, he enters the current and begins swimming toward the far shore. Midway across the river, something floating in the water catches his attention. As it drifts closer, he realizes with growing horror that it is a human corpse, bloated and decaying from days in the river. But as his eyes focus more clearly on the lifeless face, shock crashes through his entire being like lightning. The corpse is his own body. Every feature is unmistakably his own. The same face that has gazed back at him from still pools during his travels, the same hands that have held prayer beads through countless meditations, the same body that has carried him across half the world in search of enlightenment. Terror and confusion overwhelm him as he stares at his own death floating past. How can this be possible? How can he be both alive in the water and dead in the current? What manner of mystical phenomena has he encountered at the very threshold of Buddha's land? As the corpse continues downstream, carrying with it every idea he has ever held about who he is, what he has accomplished, and where he is going, something profound shifts in his consciousness. All his concepts about himself as a seeker, a monk, a person with a spiritual destination, dissolve in the rushing water. Everything he has thought he was flows away with the current. In this moment of complete disorientation, when every familiar reference point for identity has vanished, he experiences his first taste of genuine liberation. The person who has been seeking enlightenment no longer exists, and yet awareness itself remains, vast and unchanged by the loss of its previous vessel. The Buddha understood that you are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. This tale unveils the ultimate paradox of spiritual seeking. The very self that pursues enlightenment must dissolve for awakening to occur. Why is the dissolution of ego identity so crucial for spiritual realization? Buddhist psychology explains that our sense of being a separate self is the fundamental illusion that creates all other forms of suffering. As long as we maintain the fiction of being an independent entity pursuing spiritual goals, we remain trapped within the very framework that enlightenment transcends. The monk's shock at seeing his own corpse represents every seeker's eventual confrontation with the death of who they think they are. This ego death isn't a punishment or failure, but the essential prerequisite for recognizing what we've always been beneath our self-concepts. The person who begins the spiritual journey cannot be the same person who completes it, because completion requires the dissolution of the journeyer. This story operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Literally, it might describe a mystical vision or profound meditation experience. Psychologically, it represents the moment when our investment in personal identity finally collapses under the weight of deeper seeing. Spiritually, it points toward what Zen calls great death, the complete letting go that precedes authentic rebirth. The river serves as a powerful metaphor for the transition between ordinary consciousness and enlightened awareness. Rivers have always symbolized boundaries between different states of being, and crossing water often represents irreversible transformation. The monk cannot return to his previous understanding after witnessing his own death floating away. The location of this experience, at the very threshold of Buddha's land, suggests that proximity to enlightenment intensifies rather than eliminates the challenges of spiritual development. The closer we come to genuine awakening, the more thoroughly our ego defenses may attempt to reassert control, and the more completely they must be surrendered. Buddhist teacher Suzuki Roshi taught that you are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. The monk was already Buddha nature seeking itself, but his identification with being a seeker prevented him from recognizing this truth. Only by witnessing the death of the seeker could the sort reveal itself as what had been present all along. This dissolution doesn't mean we become unconscious or lose our functional capacity. Rather, we discover what remains when our stories about ourselves fall away. Beneath the narrator of our personal drama lies awareness itself, unconditioned, unborn, and unafraid of any experience, including the experience of its own apparent death. The teaching points toward what advanced practitioners call dying before death, voluntarily releasing our grip on identity while still alive, so that physical death, when it comes, feels more like changing clothes than ending existence. This isn't morbid fascination, but practical preparation for the ultimate letting go that awaits everyone. The monk's terror, followed by liberation, illustrates the emotional journey that often accompanies ego dissolution. Initial fear gives way to relief as we discover that what we thought we might lose was actually a burden we've been carrying unnecessarily. The self we've been protecting so carefully turns out to be a case of mistaken identity. Zen master Huangpo taught that nothing is gained by addition, nothing is lost by subtraction. The monk's experience demonstrates this principle. Seeing his corpse float away added nothing to his true nature while subtracting nothing essential. What remained after the dissolution was what had been present before his seeking began. Tonight, as you contemplate the various identities and self-concepts you carry, can you imagine what might remain if they all floated away like the monk's corpse? Perhaps you'll discover that what you fear losing was never who you actually are, and what you are can never be threatened by any change. As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Sometimes learning to let go includes releasing our grip on the very self that's trying to learn. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the venerable abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Cho's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Chao Cho reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Chao Cho stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Cao Cho calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao Cho's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Cho offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. Let us continue our journey with a story about compassionate teaching and the profound wisdom that can emerge from moments of transgression. This is the Master's head as a footstool. Not far from Master Sengai's temple lay a district that came alive after dark with lantern light and laughter, where pleasure quarters attracted visitors, seeking diversions far removed from the austere contemplation of monastic life. Despite the strict rules governing their conduct, many of the younger monks found themselves drawn to these worldly attractions, their human desires proving stronger than their spiritual vows. The temple wall was quite high, built to maintain the sacred boundary between the monastery and the secular world beyond. Yet where there is desire, there is often ingenuity. The monks who felt compelled to venture into the pleasure district had devised a practical solution to their architectural challenge. They would leave a wooden footstool beneath the wall to help them climb over on their way out, and, more importantly, to assist their stealthy return before dawn prayers. Master Sengai, of course, was well aware of these nocturnal expeditions. The community was small, and the signs of his students' adventures were not difficult to detect. But rather than confronting them directly or implementing harsh punishments, he chose to address the situation with characteristic wisdom and compassion. One evening, at the hour when he knew the wayward monks would be returning from their foray into worldly pleasures, Master Sengai quietly positioned himself beneath the wall. He removed the wooden footstool they habitually used and sat down in its place, settling into meditation posture as he waited patiently for their return. Toward dawn, just as expected, the monks came tiptoeing back to the temple, moving with the careful stealth of those who hope to avoid detection. They climbed the wall from the outside and began lowering themselves down into the temple grounds, their feet searching in the darkness for the familiar footstool they always left behind. To their confusion, the wooden step seemed to be missing from its usual location. They groped around with their feet, trying to locate it in the pre-dawn shadows. Finally, they felt something solid beneath them that would support their weight, and one by one, they stepped down carefully into the temple yard, using this unexpected but welcome substitute for their missing footstool. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness and the first light of dawn began to illuminate the temple grounds, the monks were horrified to discover what they had used as their stepping stone. There, still seated in perfect meditation posture, was the shaved head of Master Sengai himself. They had been stepping on their teacher's head to complete their clandestine return. Trembling with shame and fear at what they had done, the monks immediately prostrated themselves on the ground, expecting severe punishment for their transgression. They had not only broken the monastic rules by visiting the pleasure quarters, but had compounded their offense by literally using their revered teacher as a footstool. But Master Sengai's response defied all their expectations. Rather than expressing anger or disappointment, he spoke with gentle sadness, taking full responsibility for their behavior. "Your misbehavior," he said quietly, "is due to my own negligence in teaching. I have failed to provide you with the guidance and inspiration you needed to find fulfillment within our spiritual practice." The Buddha once said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." This ancient wisdom illuminates the transformative power of responding to wrongdoing with compassion rather than punishment, and the profound teaching that can emerge when we take responsibility for our role in others' mistakes. This story unveils something revolutionary about effective teaching and leadership. Instead of using his students' transgression as an opportunity to assert authority or deliver stern lectures about discipline, Master Sengai transformed the moment into a profound lesson about responsibility, humility, and compassion. Why do we typically respond to others' mistakes with blame and punishment, rather than examining our own contribution to the situation? This pattern reflects our deep conditioning to see problems as external issues, requiring correction, rather than opportunities for deeper understanding and systemic change. We focus on fixing the symptom rather than addressing the underlying causes. The monk's nocturnal adventures revealed something important about human nature and the limitations of purely restrictive approaches to spiritual development. Their desire for worldly pleasure wasn't eliminated by monastery walls and strict rules. It was simply driven underground, creating a pattern of secret transgression and guilt rather than genuine transformation. Master Sengai understood that effective spiritual teaching must work with human nature rather than simply opposing it. By acknowledging his own role in their behavior, he demonstrated a crucial principle. When people under our guidance or influence act in problematic ways, our first question should be, how have I contributed to this situation? Rather than, how should I punish them? This teaching reveals the difference between authority based on control and authority based on wisdom. The master could have used this incident to reinforce hierarchical power structures, making examples of the wayward monks to deter future rule-breaking. Instead, he chose to use his authority to model the very qualities, humility, responsibility, compassion, that he hoped to cultivate in his students. We can observe similar dynamics in many areas of life, where people in positions of responsibility interact with those under their guidance. The parent whose child acts out might consider whether their own stress or inattention contributed to the behavior. The manager whose employees underperform might examine whether unclear expectations or inadequate support played a role. The teacher whose students disengage might reflect on whether their methods are truly serving their learners' needs. Zen teachings illuminate another aspect of this story through the concept of interdependence. Master Sengai recognized that his students' behavior didn't occur in isolation. It emerged from the complex web of relationships, teachings, restrictions, and unmet needs that comprised their shared environment. By taking responsibility for his part in this web, he opened the possibility for genuine transformation. This ancient wisdom also points us toward understanding the power of unexpected responses to disrupt established patterns. The monks returned expecting to sneak back undetected, but instead encountered their teacher's head as a footstool. This shocking reversal of expectations created an opening for genuine learning that conventional punishment could never have achieved. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that maintaining authority requires consistent enforcement of rules and boundaries. Master Sengai's response suggests a different model, that true authority sometimes expresses itself through vulnerability, confession of limitation, and willingness to share responsibility for problems rather than simply imposing solutions. The story also reveals the profound teaching potential that exists within moments of apparent failure or transgression. What initially appeared to be a disciplinary crisis became an opportunity for demonstrating the very compassion and wisdom the monastery existed to cultivate. The monks learned more about authentic spiritual authority from this single incident than they might have from years of formal instruction. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the courage required for genuine leadership. It takes tremendous inner strength to respond to others' wrongdoing by examining our own contributions rather than simply asserting our righteousness. Master Sengai's willingness to use his own head as a footstool, both literally and metaphorically, demonstrated the kind of selfless service that transforms communities. Tonight, as you consider situations where people in your life have acted in ways that frustrated or disappointed you, can you identify how you might have contributed to these patterns? What would it mean to take responsibility for your part in creating the conditions that led to their behavior while still maintaining appropriate boundaries and expectations? As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. When we dissolve the artificial separation between teacher and student, leader and follower, guide and guided, we discover that true transformation occurs through shared responsibility and mutual compassion rather than hierarchical control. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission. This is the tale of Bankei and the messenger. In the bustling capital city, where merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the renowned Zen master Bankei had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his profound insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankei maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to depart for his next destination, carefully folding his few possessions into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone accustomed to moving in aristocratic circles, likely a retainer or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Venerable master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have detained him today. Would you consider postponing your departure by one day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow?" Bankei, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion, even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply, "I shall remain one more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankei waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached. But instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand what is the true nature of consciousness and how can one realize it directly. If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it. Bankei listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the profound impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankei spoke with characteristic simplicity and directness. "This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer, between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to transmit through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be." Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, embodying the very teaching he had just articulated. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This profound truth reveals itself in Bankei's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by proxy. Spiritual awakening cannot be transmitted second-hand because it is not information, but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and conveyed through intermediaries? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected, rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual transmission requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through intimate investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or transmitted because we are expressions of it. Bankei's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with diligence. The path to freedom cannot be walked by proxy. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been but perhaps never clearly seen. Let us explore a story about the true nature of our emotional patterns. This is temper. In a peaceful monastery where cherry blossoms drifted like snow across stone pathways, a troubled man approached the renowned Zen master Bankei. The visitor's face bore the weight of years of struggle, his shoulders tense with the burden he carried within. "Master," the man said, bowing deeply, "I have come seeking your wisdom because I suffer from a terrible affliction. I was born with an uncontrollable temper that erupts without warning. No matter how hard I try to suppress it, this rage emerges and destroys my relationships, my peace, and my happiness. I have tried everything: meditation, prayer, even avoiding people altogether, but nothing works. Can you help me overcome this curse I was born with?" Bankei listened with gentle attention, observing not just the man's words, but the earnestness in his voice and the genuine desire for freedom from suffering. The master's eyes held a knowing compassion, as if he could see something the visitor could not. "What a fascinating thing you describe," Bankei replied with genuine curiosity. "This terrible temper you were born with, I would very much like to see it. In fact, if you can show it to me right now, I will cure it for you immediately." The man paused, confused by this unexpected request. He looked within himself, scanning his inner landscape for the familiar flames of anger. But in this moment, sitting before the wise teacher in the tranquil setting, he found only calm awareness. "Well, Master, I don't actually have the temper right now," he admitted. "It's not here at this moment. It only appears suddenly when certain things happen, when someone criticizes me, or when I'm frustrated, or when things don't go as planned. Bankai nodded slowly, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Ah, I see. So this temper that you claim you were born with, it's not actually with you right now. It only appears under certain circumstances. If it were truly something you were born with, something that was your essential nature, wouldn't it be present all the time? The man's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. If his anger was truly innate, truly part of his fixed nature, it would never leave him. But here he sat, completely calm, the anger nowhere to be found. In that case, Bankai continued softly, this short temper is not something inherent in you at all. The Buddha once said, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth that anger, like all emotions, is not a permanent fixture of our identity, but a temporary arising that we often mistake for our essential nature. Why do we convince ourselves that difficult emotions are just who we are? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that create this misunderstanding. When we repeatedly experience certain emotional reactions, we begin to identify with them so completely that we cannot imagine ourselves without them. We say, I am an angry person, rather than, anger sometimes arises in my experience. This identification serves as a form of psychological protection. If we believe our reactivity is fixed and unchangeable, we avoid the responsibility and the freedom that comes with recognizing our capacity to respond differently. It feels safer to say, this is just how I am, than to acknowledge the more empowering truth that we have choice in every moment. Consider how often throughout your day you might declare aspects of your experience as permanent fixtures of your identity. I'm not a morning person. I'm terrible with technology. I'm just naturally anxious. Each of these statements reinforces the illusion that our patterns are immutable rather than simply habits that can be transformed through awareness and practice. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. This paradox points to the truth that while our essential nature is already whole and complete, the patterns we've layered over that nature through conditioning can be examined and shifted. The man in our story discovered what meditation practitioners call the gap, the space between thoughts, the pause between reactions, where our true nature exists unmarked by temporary emotional weather. In that gap, he could see clearly that anger was not his identity, but simply a conditioned response that arose under certain circumstances. When we recognize that our difficult emotions are visitors rather than permanent residents, we can greet them differently. Instead of, I am angry, we might observe, anger is arising. This subtle shift creates space for the emotion to be present without consuming our entire identity. Tonight, as you reflect on the patterns you might have labeled as just who you are, can you find the spaces where these patterns are absent? Can you locate the aware presence that remains constant, whether anger, sadness, or joy is present? As the Buddha taught, you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are the awareness that observes them. In recognizing this distinction, we discover the freedom that was always available beneath our conditioned responses. Now, let us explore a Zen story about flowing with natural forces and the profound wisdom of accommodation rather than resistance. This is the bamboo in the hut. Master Ryokan's mountain dwelling was as simple and humble as his lifestyle. A small hut constructed with basic materials that provided adequate shelter without any pretense to permanence or grandeur. The structure reflected his philosophy of taking only what was necessary from the natural environment while remaining open to whatever changes the seasons and elements might bring. One spring, as the earth warmed and new life stirred throughout the mountain forests, something unexpected began happening beneath the wooden floorboards of the master's hut. Tiny bamboo shoots, following their ancient genetic programming to seek light and space for growth, started emerging from the soil below his living space. Most people, discovering this situation, would have immediately seen it as a problem requiring swift action. Bamboo is notorious for its vigorous growth and its ability to damage structures. Left unchecked, the shoots would certainly push up through the floorboards, creating holes and potentially compromising the integrity of the entire building. The conventional response would have been to cut away the bamboo before it could cause structural damage. But Master Ryokan saw the situation differently. Rather than viewing the emerging bamboo as an unwelcome intrusion or a threat to his shelter, he chose to work with the natural forces at play. Without hesitation, he began tearing up sections of his floorboards to create space for the bamboo shoots to grow freely toward the light they sought. As the weeks passed, the bamboo responded to his accommodation by growing with remarkable speed and vigor. The shoots rose higher and higher, soon reaching the ceiling of the small hut and pressing against the roof beams. Again, most people would have seen this as the point where drastic action became necessary. Either the bamboo had to be cut or the dwelling would be destroyed. Once again, Master Ryokan chose accommodation over resistance. He carefully removed sections of his roof to allow the bamboo to continue its upward growth, creating openings that let the shoots emerge into the open air above his living space. The bamboo responded by growing through the roof and continuing to reach toward the sky. The final result of this process was remarkable. Master Ryokan found himself living in a hut where living bamboo grew up through the floor and extended through the roof, creating a unique dwelling that was part human construction and part natural forest. Rather than seeing this as a compromised or damaged living situation, he embraced it as an enhancement that brought him into even more intimate contact with natural processes. Untroubled by what others might consider a highly irregular living arrangement, Master Ryokan simply continued his daily practices of meditation, study, and contemplation. He sat in zazen beneath the living bamboo that now shared his dwelling space, finding that their presence added a quality of natural aliveness and seasonal awareness that conventional architecture could never provide. The bamboo became his intimate companions, growing and changing with the seasons, rustling softly in the wind, and creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted throughout the day. What had begun as a potential problem had been transformed through his willingness to accommodate natural forces into an enhancement of his simple mountain life. As the Buddha observed, nothing is permanent except change. This teaching relates profoundly to our capacity for flowing with natural processes, rather than rigidly defending our constructed plans and arrangements against the inevitable forces of growth and transformation. This ancient wisdom illuminates our typical approaches to unexpected changes in our carefully organized lives. Most of us invest tremendous energy in creating structures, physical, emotional, professional, social, that we then feel compelled to defend against any forces that might alter them. We treat change as disruption rather than opportunity, as problems to be solved rather than invitations to discover new possibilities. Master Ryokan's response to the bamboo demonstrates a radically different relationship with the unexpected. Rather than seeing the shoots as invasive problems threatening his security, he recognized them as natural expressions of life force seeking room to grow. His accommodation of their needs led to a living situation that was far more interesting and dynamic than his original static dwelling. Why do we typically resist natural processes of growth and change, even when they might lead to improvements in our circumstances? This resistance often stems from our attachment to predictability and our fear that any deviation from our plans will lead to chaos or loss of control. We prefer the security of familiar limitations to the uncertainty of organic development. The master's willingness to tear up his floorboards and modify his roof represents the kind of fundamental flexibility that authentic spiritual practice cultivates. Rather than defending his comfort zone against all modifications, he remained open to discovering what new forms of livability might emerge through cooperation with forces beyond his control. This story reveals the difference between accommodation and passive surrender. Ryokan wasn't simply accepting whatever happened without response. He was actively participating in creating solutions that honored both his need for shelter and the bamboo's need for growing space. His actions were both practical and deeply cooperative with natural processes. We can observe similar opportunities for creative accommodation in many areas of life. The parent whose carefully planned family routines are disrupted by a child's unexpected interests or needs. The business owner whose established procedures need modification to accommodate changing market conditions. The individual whose life plans are altered by unforeseen circumstances that could lead to entirely new possibilities. Zen practice cultivates what might be called adaptive wisdom, the ability to work creatively with whatever emerges, rather than rigidly defending predetermined structures against natural processes of change and growth. This requires a fundamental trust that flow and adaptation often lead to outcomes superior to our original fixed plans. The image of Master Ryokan meditating beneath living bamboo that grew through his dwelling represents a profound teaching about integration with natural rhythms. Instead of seeing his spiritual practice as something that required complete separation from natural processes, he discovered how accommodation of organic growth could enhance rather than compromise his contemplative life. This teaching also points us toward understanding the difference between problems and opportunities. The bamboo shoots initially appeared to threaten the master's shelter, but his willingness to work with them creatively transformed potential destruction into unusual enhancement. Our capacity to see challenges as invitations for creative response often determines whether difficulties become sources of growth or simply sources of stress. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual practice requires completely controlled environments free from unexpected intrusions. Master Ryokan's story suggests that authentic practice might actually be strengthened by learning to maintain inner peace while accommodating whatever natural forces emerge in our immediate environment. The story reveals how often our concepts of proper order and appropriate boundaries can blind us to possibilities for richer, more integrated ways of living. The master's hut, with bamboo growing through it, challenged conventional ideas about indoor and outdoor spaces, but created a unique form of dwelling that honored both human needs and natural processes. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the creativity that can emerge when we stop fighting against what wants to happen and instead ask how we might work with emerging forces to create something neither we nor they could have achieved independently. Tonight, as you consider areas of your life where unexpected changes or growth are challenging your established routines and structures? Can you identify opportunities for creative accommodation rather than rigid resistance? What would it mean to tear up a few floorboards to make room for natural processes that might enhance rather than threaten your overall well-being? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the wise find pleasure in water, virtue in mountains, and wisdom in forests. By learning to live in harmony with natural forces, rather than constant opposition to them, we discover forms of security and satisfaction that rigid control can never provide. The deep peace that comes from flowing with life, rather than constantly struggling against it. Let us continue on our journey with a cautionary tale about the perils of spiritual superiority. This is the story of the clever monkey. In ancient China, the Prince of Wu decided to take a pleasure boat to the famous Monkey Mountain, a place known for its abundant wildlife and scenic beauty. The prince, surrounded by his attendants and guards, approached the mountain with the casual confidence of royalty, expecting the natural world to accommodate his presence just as his human subjects did. As soon as the monkeys dwelling in the forest caught sight of the royal party, they fled in terror. The sound of chattering filled the air as dozens of monkeys scrambled up into the highest branches of the trees, their natural instinct warning them to hide from these human intruders. The forest, which moments before had been alive with playful monkey calls, fell silent except for the rustling of leaves as the creatures sought safety in the treetops. However, one monkey remained completely unconcerned by the royal presence. This particular monkey seemed utterly fearless, continuing his acrobatic display with remarkable skill and apparent indifference to the danger below. He swung gracefully from branch to branch, performing elaborate leaps and displaying his dexterity as if putting on a show. His movements were fluid and confident, each gesture demonstrating his superior agility and intelligence compared to his cowering companions. The Prince of Wu watched this extraordinary display with growing annoyance. Here was a mere animal that dared to show no respect for royal authority, that seemed to mock the very presence of the prince through its casual dismissal of the obvious threat. The monkey's confidence appeared to be a direct challenge to the prince's power. Deciding to teach this insolent creature a lesson, the prince drew his bow and shot an arrow directly at the monkey. But to the amazement of all present, the monkey dexterously caught the arrow in mid-flight, plucking it from the air as easily as one might catch a falling leaf. The monkey examined the arrow briefly, then tossed it aside with casual dismissal, as if such feats were nothing more than child's play. The prince's face darkened with rage at this humiliation. His skill as an archer had been made to look foolish by a mere animal. "Attack!" he ordered his attendants. "Bring down this arrogant beast." A volley of arrows filled the air. The monkey, suddenly overwhelmed by the coordinated assault, could not deflect them all. In an instant, he was struck by multiple arrows and fell dead to the forest floor, his extraordinary abilities proving useless against such overwhelming force. The prince turned to his wise companion, Yen Pui, who had watched this scene unfold with growing understanding. "You see what happened," the prince said. "This animal advertised his cleverness. He trusted in his own skill. He thought no one could touch him. Remember that. Do not rely on distinction and talent when you deal with men." Yen Pui absorbed this lesson deeply. When they returned to the kingdom, he reflected on how his own accomplishments and reputation might be creating the same dangerous pride that had destroyed the monkey. he quietly became the disciple of a humble sage, seeking to rid himself of everything that made him appear outstanding or special. He renounced the pleasures that had once defined his status and learned to hide every distinction that might set him apart from others. Through patient practice, Yenpu cultivated such genuine humility that soon no one in the kingdom knew what to make of him. He had become so ordinary, so unassuming, that people began to sense something profound in his very ordinariness. Thus, they held him in awe, not for what he displayed, but for the mysterious depth they sensed beneath his simple presence. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know." This tale unveils the spiritual danger of making our wisdom or abilities into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel compelled to demonstrate our spiritual understanding or special qualities? Zen Buddhism reveals how the ego co-opts even our most genuine insights, turning them into tools for maintaining separation and superiority. The very achievements that should dissolve the sense of separate self can actually strengthen it when we become identified with being advanced or enlightened. The story points us toward understanding how spiritual pride operates. Like the monkey, we may develop genuine abilities through practice, deeper calm, clearer insight, or greater compassion. But when we begin to identify with these qualities, when we use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become weapons that ultimately destroy us. This ancient wisdom illuminates a paradox at the heart of spiritual development. The more we genuinely progress, the more invisible that progress should become. True wisdom naturally expresses itself as humility because it reveals the interconnected nature of all existence, dissolving any basis for feeling superior to others. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki spoke of "don't know mind" as the essence of beginner's mind. This is not ignorance, but the wisdom that recognizes how little our conceptual understanding actually penetrates the mystery of existence. The monkey's tragedy was believing his cleverness made him special rather than recognizing it as a temporary expression of universal intelligence. The Buddha taught, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Yenpu discovered that by hiding his distinctions, by becoming nothing special, he accessed a more profound kind of influence, one that touched others through presence rather than performance. Consider your own spiritual journey. Can you notice moments when insights or abilities become sources of subtle pride? When meditation experiences, psychological understanding, or compassionate actions become ways of feeling different from or better than others? Each time we make our practice into an identity, we create the spiritual equivalent of the monkey's dangerous display. Tonight, as you rest in simple being, can you practice the art of being nobody special? Can you find the freedom that comes not from demonstrating your wisdom, but from resting in the ordinary mystery of awareness itself? As the Buddha said, "Those who are free of resentful thoughts surely find peace." The deepest peace comes when we release even our attachment to being peaceful. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between submission and genuine understanding. This is the lesson of the proud priest and the gentle master. Master Bankei had gained quite a reputation throughout the region. Unlike other teachers who filled their talks with complex philosophical arguments and lengthy quotations from ancient texts, Bankei spoke directly from his heart to the hearts of his listeners. His words were simple but profound, accessible to farmers and scholars alike. People from all walks of life, merchants, servants, samurai, and monks gathered to hear him speak about the natural peace that exists within every person. The master's growing popularity began to trouble a priest from the Nichiren sect, whose own temple had grown noticeably emptier as his followers left to hear about Zen. This priest had built his identity around being learned, respected, and obeyed. He prided himself on his knowledge of scriptures and his ability to win theological debates. The idea that a simple Zen teacher could attract his devoted followers with plain speaking felt like a personal insult. Determined to expose what he assumed must be shallow teaching disguised as wisdom, the Nichiren priest stormed into one of Bankai's gatherings. He pushed through the crowd of seated listeners, his robes billowing dramatically, his face stern with righteous indignation. The peaceful atmosphere of quiet attention was suddenly charged with tension as people turned to see what was happening. "Hey, Zen teacher!" the priest called out loudly, his voice echoing through the hall. The deliberate rudeness of his address was unmistakable. He was treating the revered master like a common street performer. "Wait just a minute. I have something to say to you." Bankai looked up calmly from where he sat, showing no sign of irritation or defensiveness at the interruption. His eyes held the same gentle attention he gave to every person who approached him, whether they came with genuine questions or hostile challenges. "All these people here respect you and will obey whatever you say," the priest continued, his voice growing louder as he warmed to his challenge. "But a man like myself does not respect you at all. Can you make me obey you? Can your so-called wisdom compel someone who sees through your simple tricks?" The crowd held its breath, expecting either an angry response or a learned rebuttal that would put this arrogant challenger in his place. Instead, Bankai smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth and curiosity. "Please come up beside me," the master said gently, "and I will show you." The priest, feeling triumphant that he had provoked a response and confident in his ability to expose whatever manipulation was about to unfold, proudly pushed his way through the crowd to the front of the hall. He stood beside the master's simple cushion, his chest puffed out with self-importance, ready to demonstrate his independence from this supposed authority. "Thank you," Bankei said with the same gentle smile. "Now we might hear each other better if you come over to my left side. Please step over here." Without thinking, the priest moved to Bankai's left side. It seemed like a reasonable request after all. "Actually," Bankai continued thoughtfully, "perhaps we could speak more clearly if you were on my right side instead. Would you mind stepping over there?" Again, the priest complied automatically. It was such a small, sensible adjustment that he didn't even notice he was following instructions. Bankai's smile deepened, his eyes twinkling with gentle amusement. "You see," he observed quietly, "you are already obeying me. And I think you are actually a very gentle, cooperative person. Now please sit down and listen to what I have to share." The priest stood frozen, suddenly realizing what had just happened. He had come to demonstrate his independence and superiority, but had instead revealed his natural willingness to respond cooperatively to kind, reasonable requests. His whole argument had dissolved not through force or clever rhetoric, but through his own unconscious behavior. The crowd remained silent, but many people were struggling not to smile. They had witnessed something remarkable, not a defeat or humiliation, but a gentle revelation. The master had shown that true influence comes not from demanding obedience, but from inviting natural cooperation. The priest felt his anger and arrogance melting away. replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. How had this simple man accomplished what felt like magic? How had he transformed a hostile confrontation into a moment of mutual understanding without ever raising his voice or asserting his authority? Still somewhat dazed by the experience, the priest sat down. As Bankai began to speak again, the words seemed to bypass his analytical mind and speak directly to his heart. For the first time in years, he listened not to find flaws or prepare counter-arguments, but simply to hear what was being offered. Buddha's wisdom tells us, true obedience is not blind submission, but conscious harmony. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between the compliance that comes from fear or social pressure and the natural cooperation that arises from genuine understanding. Why do we so often confuse authority with authoritarianism, influence with coercion? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning around power. We assume that getting others to cooperate requires force, manipulation, or the assertion of superiority. But the deepest teaching here shows us that true leadership emerges from understanding human nature, not from overpowering it. The priest came expecting to encounter someone who would try to dominate him because that was the only model of authority he knew, when instead he met someone who simply invited his natural cooperativeness. His entire framework for understanding power and influence was gently challenged. Consider your own experiences with authority. The teachers, bosses, or leaders who most positively influenced your life. Did they command your respect through force, or did they earn it by appealing to your better nature? The difference is profound. Forced compliance creates resentment and resistance, while invited cooperation creates genuine change. In our daily relationships, we often fall into the same trap as the priest. We approach conflicts assuming we need to overpower others to get what we want. We prepare arguments, marshal our defenses, and ready ourselves for battle. But Bankai's approach suggests a different possibility. What if we assumed the best about others and invited their natural wisdom to emerge? Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over." The priest's aggression came from his own insecurity and fear of being displaced. Bankai's genius lay in seeing past the hostile surface to the suffering underneath, then responding to the suffering rather than the aggression. This doesn't mean being passive or allowing ourselves to be mistreated. Bankai maintained clear boundaries and didn't submit to the priest's demands for a debate. Instead, he redirected the energy of the encounter towards something more constructive. He transformed a potential power struggle into a teaching moment. The Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. This principle applies not just to obvious hatred, but to all forms of resistance and conflict. When we meet resistance with resistance, we simply create more tension. When we meet resistance with understanding, we create space for transformation. Tonight, as you consider the relationships and situations in your life where you feel the need to assert your will or defend your position, can you remember the gentle master who never commanded obedience, yet received complete cooperation? Can you find ways to invite others' natural wisdom rather than trying to overpower their resistance? As the Buddha observed, in separateness lies the world's greatest misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. True authority comes not from the power to make others obey, but from the wisdom to help them discover their own desire to cooperate in creating something beautiful together. Now, let us turn to a tale about the difference between wisdom and words that attempt to contain it. This is the story of the pointing finger. In a peaceful valley monastery where evening mist gathered among ancient pines, a beloved Zen teacher enjoyed his daily ritual of walking with his faithful dog. The animal's joy was infectious, bounding ahead to retrieve sticks and returning with tail wagging, eyes bright with simple happiness. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his most promising students to join them. The young man was brilliant, his mind sharp as a blade, and equally capable of cutting through complex philosophical concepts. Yet this very intelligence had become a source of suffering. The more he studied Buddhist texts, the more contradictions he discovered. His bright mind seemed to be creating obstacles rather than clearing them. As they walked along the familiar trail, the student voiced his frustration. "Master, I struggle with contradictions in our teachings. Some texts speak of emptiness, others of Buddha nature. Some emphasize effort, others effortless being. How can these opposing instructions both be true?" The teacher listened with patient attention. He understood that intellectual brilliance could become a trap when the mind tried to grasp truth like solving a mathematical equation. Truth required a different kind of knowing altogether. "You must understand," the teacher said gently, "that words are only guideposts. Never let words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I'll show you." The teacher called his dog, who came running with eager enthusiasm. The full moon hung low in the darkening sky, its silver light beginning to emerge as daylight faded. The teacher pointed directly at the luminous orb and spoke to his pet with the same tone he used for their usual games. "Fetch me the moon," he commanded, his finger extended clearly toward the celestial body. The dog's response was immediate and predictable. His gaze fixed intently on the teacher's outstretched finger, following its movement with focused attention he typically reserved for thrown sticks. The animal's entire being concentrated on the pointing digit, completely oblivious to the moon hanging magnificently above. The teacher turned to his confused student with a knowing smile. "Where is my dog looking?" The student observed the scene with growing awareness. "He's looking at your finger," he replied, beginning to sense the deeper lesson. "Exactly," the teacher confirmed. "Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only guideposts. Every person must fight their way through other people's words to find their own truth." The young student stood in silence, feeling something shift in his understanding. The moon shone overhead, its light touching everything equally, regardless of whether anyone pointed at it. The truth was like that moon, present and luminous, independent of any description or analysis. As the Buddha observed, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching addresses the exact confusion that plagued the bright student, mistaking concepts about truth for truth itself. Here we discover how intellectual understanding, while valuable, can become a barrier when we rely on it exclusively. The student's brilliant mind was capable of analyzing and comparing teachings, but analysis alone cannot deliver the direct experience that spiritual awakening requires. Like the dog fixated on the finger, he had become so focused on examining words and concepts that he missed the reality they attempted to indicate. Why do we become trapped in conceptual understanding? The thinking mind operates through division and comparison, understanding by breaking things into categories. But ultimate truth transcends these dualistic distinctions. It cannot be captured in concepts any more than the moon can be held in a photograph. This creates what Zen calls the great doubt, the frustrating recognition that our usual ways of knowing are inadequate for the most important questions. Different teachings use different words to point toward the same ineffable reality, like multiple fingers pointing at the same moon from various angles. Consider how this pattern manifests in spiritual seeking. We collect teachings like treasures, memorizing quotes from masters, analyzing meditation techniques, comparing different traditions. All of this can be valuable, but becomes problematic when we mistake accumulation of spiritual knowledge for spiritual development itself. Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki said, "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon." This applies not only to spiritual teachings, but to all areas where we confuse the map for the territory. In relationships, we can become so focused on analyzing the relationship that we lose touch with the actual experience of loving. In nature, we can become so busy photographing that we miss the immediate wonder of simply being present. The moon represents what Zen calls our original nature, the awareness that exists prior to all concepts and categories. This awareness is always present, just as the moon exists whether or not anyone points at it. It doesn't need to be created or achieved, only recognized. This doesn't mean abandoning study or intellectual understanding. The teacher himself used words and concepts to convey his lesson. Rather, it means holding our conceptual knowledge lightly, using it as a tool rather than an end goal. Like a ladder that helps us reach a roof, spiritual teachings can be discarded once they've served their purpose. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable complexity of modern life, can you distinguish between the pointing fingers and what they point toward? When you study spiritual teachings or seek guidance, can you remember that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon of your own innate wisdom? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, work out your salvation with diligence. The work involves not just understanding teachings intellectually, but moving through them to the reality they indicate. Our next story reveals the mysterious ways that true effort emerges when we release our preconceptions about purpose. This takes place in a mountain monastery in ancient China, where two devoted students named Puk and Muk serve their master with unwavering dedication. The morning sun streams through the monastery windows as the master calls his two students to him. In his weathered hands, he holds a simple wicker basket, its bamboo strips woven in traditional patterns, but clearly designed for carrying dry goods, not liquids. The master's eyes twinkle with what the students will later recognize as gentle mischief as he announces their task for the day. "I need water," the master says, extending the basket toward them. "Please go to the river and fetch some water with this wicker basket." Puk and Muk exchange puzzled glances, but bow respectfully. They have learned not to question their master's instructions, no matter how unusual they might seem. Together, they carry the basket down the winding path to the river, its waters rushing clear and cold from the mountain peaks above. Reaching the riverbank, they wade into the gentle current and dip the basket below the surface. As expected, the water immediately flows through the woven strips, leaving them empty-handed. Undeterred, they try again, this time attempting to move more quickly from river to shore. Still, every drop escapes before they can take even a few steps. For hours, they experiment with different techniques. They try covering the basket with their robes, moving in coordinated patterns, even attempting to carry it together. Each effort ends the same way, with empty hands and growing frustration, yet something keeps them trying. Perhaps it's their devotion to their master, or perhaps it's the puzzle itself that compels them to continue. Finally, as the sun begins its afternoon descent, they return to the monastery with heavy hearts and the same empty basket. "Master," Puk begins hesitantly, "we have tried everything, but the basket simply will not hold water." The master takes the basket from their hands and examines it carefully, running his fingers along the bamboo strips. A smile spreads across his face as he says, "Ah, wonderful. The basket has never been this clean. If I had simply asked you to clean it, you would have given it a quick rinse. But motivated by the challenge of carrying water, you have scrubbed every surface, forced water through every crevice, and polished it to perfection." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. This tale unveils the profound difference between going through motions and genuine engagement with our tasks. Why do we struggle to bring our full attention to mundane activities? Zen teachings illuminate how our ego creates hierarchies of importance, labeling some tasks as worthy of our best effort and others as mere drudgery to be completed as quickly as possible. We save our enthusiasm for activities that promise recognition, pleasure, or advancement, while treating necessary maintenance work as obstacles to more meaningful pursuits. Our minds constantly evaluate whether activities deserve our full presence. Cleaning becomes a chore when we focus solely on having clean spaces. Exercise becomes tedious when we think only of fitness goals. Cooking becomes rushed when we view it merely as fuel preparation. In each case, we rob ourselves of the intrinsic satisfaction available in skillful engagement with the task itself. The Buddha taught that right action emerges naturally when we bring wholehearted attention to whatever we're doing. Puk and Muk discovered this principle accidentally. Motivated by their desire to solve the master's puzzle, they transcended their usual approach to cleaning and brought creativity, persistence, and total engagement to their work. Master Linji taught, "There is nothing special to do, just be ordinary. Relieve yourself, wash your face, put on your clothes, and eat your food. When tired, sleep." This ordinariness points not to carelessness, but to bringing the same quality of presence to every activity. The sacred isn't found in special practices, but in meeting common tasks with uncommon attention. Consider how your relationship to household chores might transform if you approach them as spiritual practice. What if washing dishes became meditation on impermanence? What if organizing your living space became an exercise in mindful attention to detail? What if preparing meals became an offering of nourishment to yourself and others? The deeper pattern here reveals how indirect approaches often evoke our best efforts. When we focus directly on outcomes, we often become self-conscious and restrictive. When we focus on meeting challenges or serving others, our natural capabilities emerge more fully. Tonight, as you encounter tasks that your mind judges as unimportant, can you experiment with bringing the attention you'd give to something precious? Perhaps you'll discover that the quality of presence you bring to any activity determines its capacity to nourish your spirit. As the Buddha said, if you want to know your past life, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. Every mundane task is an opportunity to practice the presence that shapes both your character and your experience of aliveness. Let us continue our journey with a story about maintaining inner balance regardless of external circumstances. This is the teaching of Master Hakuin and the power of, is that so? Master Hakuin lived in a small village where he was deeply respected for his wisdom, compassion, and exemplary character. For decades, he had maintained a reputation as a pure and enlightened teacher, someone who had transcended ordinary human weaknesses and embodied the highest spiritual ideals. Villagers often brought their problems to him, seeking guidance and inspiration from his teachings and his impeccable way of life. In this same village lived a beautiful young woman whose family was well known and respected. When she became pregnant outside of marriage, her condition caused a scandal that rippled through the tight-knit community. Her parents were furious and demanded to know who was responsible for bringing such shame upon their family. At first, the young woman refused to reveal the father's identity. She was protecting someone she loved, someone whose reputation and future would be destroyed if the truth came out. But as her parents' anger intensified and the pressure became unbearable, she made a desperate decision. In a moment of panic and confusion, she pointed to the one person she thought could weather this storm better than her actual lover, the respected Master Hakuin. When her outraged parents confronted the Zen master with their daughter's accusation, they expected protests of innocence, explanations, or at least some expression of shock at being falsely accused. Instead, Hakuin listened calmly to their angry words and simply replied, "Is that so?" His response only seemed to confirm their worst suspicions. Surely an innocent man would defend himself more vigorously. The scandal exploded throughout the village. People who had revered Hakuin as a saint now whispered that he was a hypocrite who had been living a lie. His reputation was destroyed overnight, and former students abandoned him in disgust and disappointment. When the child was born, the parents brought the baby directly to Hakuin. "This is your responsibility now," they declared bitterly. "Since you are the father, you must take care of this child." They thrust the infant into his arms and walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of a crime he had never committed. Again, Hakuin simply said, "Is that so?" and accepted the baby without protest or explanation. For many months, the former master cared for the child with tender attention. He fed the infant, changed diapers, walked the floors during sleepless nights, and provided all the love and care that any devoted parent would give. Neighbors who had once brought him offerings of food and respect now ignored him or spoke of him with contempt. He had lost his position, his reputation, and his livelihood, but he continued to care for the child with peaceful dedication. Meanwhile, the young woman struggled with the weight of her lie. Watching the revered teacher suffer for her deception while caring lovingly for a child that wasn't his became unbearable. The guilt consumed her until she could no longer live with what she had done. Finally, she confessed the truth to her parents. The real father was a young man in the village whom she had been trying to protect. Her parents were horrified to learn what they had done to an innocent man. They rushed to Hakuin's simple dwelling with profuse apologies. "Master, we have wronged you terribly," they said, bowing deeply. "Our daughter has confessed that you are not the father. We know now that you have suffered unjustly for our mistake. Please forgive us and allow us to take the child back to its real family." Hakuin listened to their apologies with the same equanimity he had shown to their accusations. As he gently placed the baby in their arms, he offered the same response he had given throughout the entire ordeal. "Is that so?" As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the profound power of maintaining inner equilibrium regardless of how others perceive us or what circumstances life presents. Why do we allow external events and other people's opinions to determine our inner state? Zen Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes from developing an unshakable center that remains stable, whether we're being praised or blamed, honored or dishonored, treated fairly or unjustly. Hakuin's response, "Is that so?" represents a profound spiritual practice. He wasn't being indifferent or passive. He was demonstrating the ultimate non-attachment to reputation, status, and even justice itself. His consistent response showed that his sense of worth and purpose came from within rather than from external validation. Consider how differently most of us would react to false accusations, public humiliation, and complete loss of reputation. The natural human response is to defend ourselves, to fight against injustice, to demand that others see the truth. But Hakuin's approach reveals another possibility, meeting all circumstances with the same peaceful acceptance. This doesn't mean we should never defend ourselves or that we should passively accept all injustices. Hakuin's teaching is more subtle. He shows us that our inner peace doesn't have to depend on external circumstances being fair or favorable. We can maintain our center regardless of how the world treats us. The Buddha taught, "You will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger." Hakuin's equanimity protected him from the additional suffering that would have come from resentment, self-pity, or desperate attempts to restore his reputation. While the situation was undoubtedly challenging, he didn't compound the difficulty with emotional resistance. Look deeply at your own reactions to criticism, misunderstanding, or unfair treatment. How much of your suffering comes from the actual events, and how much comes from your mental and emotional responses to those events? Hakuin's example suggests that we have far more control over the second source of suffering than the first. Tonight, as you encounter whatever judgments, misunderstandings, or unfair treatments life may bring, can you remember Master Hakuin's peaceful, "Is that so?" Can you find the space between what happens to you and how you respond, discovering that your inner peace need not be held hostage by external circumstances? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. True spiritual development isn't measured by how well life treats us, but by how gracefully we can meet whatever life brings, maintaining our compassion, dignity, and inner tranquility, regardless of whether the world recognizes our worth or understands our true nature. Our next story reveals a teaching about the fluid nature of identity and the wisdom that transcends conventional categories of pure and impure. This is the all-purpose bowl. Master Sengai's living quarters reflected his approach to life, simple, practical, and unencumbered by the elaborate protocols that many people believed necessary for proper spiritual living. Among his few possessions was a single mixing bowl that served multiple functions throughout his daily routine, demonstrating his commitment to simplicity and his freedom from conventional social expectations. Each morning after relieving himself, the master would fill this bowl with water and use it to wash his hands thoroughly, ensuring proper hygiene while maintaining his focus on present moment awareness. The bowl served this practical sanitary function with the same dignity it brought to all its uses. Later, at lunchtime, Master Sengai would take this same bowl to prepare vegetables that would accompany his simple meal of boiled rice. He would wash and cut vegetables in the bowl, mix seasonings, and use it for all the food preparation that his modest meals required. Finally, he would add the prepared rice to the bowl, transforming it into his eating vessel for the day's main meal. This pattern continued day after day, season after season. The same bowl served seamlessly as wash basin, food preparation vessel, and rice container, its functions shifting fluidly according to the master's immediate needs. To him, this arrangement was perfectly natural and efficient, demonstrating the practical wisdom of not multiplying possessions unnecessarily. However, this unconventional approach eventually caught the attention of a guest who was visiting the temple. Watching the master's routine with growing concern, the visitor finally felt compelled to speak up about what seemed like a serious hygiene violation. "Your Reverence," the guest cautioned carefully, not wanting to offend, but feeling the need to point out what appeared obvious. "Are you sure it's all right to use the same bowl to wash your hands and then serve food? Doesn't this seem unsanitary? What about the risk of contamination?" Master Sengai paused in his meal preparation and looked at his concerned visitor with eyes that held no defensiveness, no irritation at having his methods questioned. Instead, his response revealed a perspective that transcended conventional categories of clean and dirty, appropriate and inappropriate. "When I put food into it," the master explained simply, "it's rice bowl world. And when I wash my hands in it, it's wash bowl world." He paused to let this sink in before continuing with the heart of his teaching. "To you, a wash bowl seems filthy. To me, there's neither pure nor polluted." The guest stood quietly, absorbing the implications of this response, recognizing that the master had just revealed something profound about the nature of identity, function, and the mental categories we use to organize our experience of reality. The Buddha taught, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive diligently." This teaching relates profoundly to our understanding of how identity and purpose are fluid rather than fixed, and how our mental categories often create artificial distinctions that separate us from direct experience. This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to assign permanent identities to objects, people, and situations based on single functions or temporary characteristics. We label things as clean or dirty, sacred or profane, appropriate or inappropriate, often forgetting that these designations exist in our minds rather than as inherent properties of the things themselves. Master Sengai's bowl demonstrates something revolutionary about the nature of identity and function. The physical bowl remained unchanged, whether serving as wash basin or food container. Only its contextual use shifted. The master recognized that our mental categories of pure and impure are human constructs that can blind us to the essential nature of things, which exists beyond such dualistic thinking. This teaching reveals our attachment to complex systems of classification and protocol that often serve social convention more than practical wisdom. We create elaborate rules about which objects can serve, which functions, which combinations are acceptable, which boundaries must never be crossed. While some distinctions serve genuine health and safety purposes, many others simply reflect conditioned thinking rather than necessary reality. Why do we find it so disturbing when someone violates our expected categories and boundaries? This discomfort often arises from our deep need for predictability and our investment in the mental frameworks we use to organize experience. When someone demonstrates that our categories are more flexible than we assumed, it can threaten our sense of how the world should work. The master's phrase, rice bowl world and wash bowl world, points toward understanding how context determines meaning rather than inherent properties determining function. The same water can be drinking water in one context and cleaning water in another. The same words can be poetry in one setting and prose in another. The same action can be sacred in one moment and ordinary in another. This story also reveals the difference between practical hygiene and psychological categorization. Master Sengai wasn't advocating careless sanitation. He washed both the bowl and his hands thoroughly. His point was that our mental designations of pure and impure often extend far beyond actual cleanliness into realm of social anxiety and rigid thinking that can separate us from direct, practical engagement with life. We can observe similar patterns in many areas where we create unnecessary complications through over-categorization. The person who needs multiple sets of dishes because they can't bear to serve different types of food on the same plates. The office that requires separate equipment for different tasks that could easily be shared. The community that insists on elaborate protocols for activities that could be handled simply and directly. Zen practice cultivates what might be called functional flexibility, the ability to work with things according to their immediate utility rather than their assigned social categories. This doesn't mean ignoring genuine practical considerations, but rather questioning which distinctions serve real purposes and which ones simply reflect conditioned thinking. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual people should maintain higher standards of purity and separation than ordinary folks. Master Sengai's approach suggests that true spiritual understanding might actually move in the opposite direction, toward greater integration and less artificial separation between different aspects of life. The story points us toward understanding that purity and pollution are often mental constructs rather than absolute realities. When we can see beyond these constructed categories to the essential nature of things, including our own essential nature, we discover a freedom that doesn't depend on maintaining elaborate systems of separation and classification. We also find ourselves confronted by questions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior. The master's unconventional approach challenged his guests' assumptions about proper conduct, revealing how our expectations about spiritual living can sometimes create unnecessary complexity rather than supporting genuine simplicity and wisdom. Tonight, as you notice the various categories and distinctions you use to organize your experience, can you identify places where these mental constructs might be creating unnecessary separation or complication? What would it mean to hold your classifications more lightly, allowing function and context to determine appropriateness rather than rigid preconceptions? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. When we understand that the categories we assign to experiences exist in our minds rather than as inherent properties of things themselves, we discover a flexibility and freedom that allows us to work with life more directly and practically, seeing through artificial distinctions to the fluid, interconnected nature of all existence. Tonight, as we draw our time together to a quiet close, can you feel how different your mind is right now compared to when we began? Can you notice the spaciousness that has opened up, the gentle stillness that wasn't there before? This isn't something you've achieved through effort. It's something you've discovered by simply letting go of the struggle to control your thoughts. The Buddha reminded us, the mind is like water. When agitated, it becomes difficult to see. When calm, everything becomes clear. As you rest in this moment, notice how this clarity feels. Not empty in a vacant way, but empty like a clear sky that can hold any weather without being disturbed by it. Each story tonight has pointed to the same liberating truth, that the mental peace you've been searching for was never actually missing. The frantic thoughts, the endless mental chatter, the overwhelming noise in your head, none of these are your true nature. They're simply weather patterns passing through the vast open sky of your awareness. Even when tomorrow brings its usual challenges, even when your mind starts racing again, remember what you've experienced here. The capacity for this mental quiet isn't something special or rare. It's as natural as breathing. You don't have to earn it or perfect it. You simply have to stop fighting it and allow it to be. Consider how effortless this feels right now. Your thoughts may still be present, but they're no longer demanding all your attention. They arise and pass away like gentle waves on a calm lake, while you rest peacefully in the depths beneath. This is what the masters meant by an empty mind, not the absence of thoughts, but freedom from being controlled by them. These ancient teachings have shown you something remarkable, that mental freedom doesn't require years of practice or perfect circumstances. It requires only the willingness to stop struggling and recognize the natural stillness that's always been here, patiently waiting beneath the surface noise. The peace you feel right now isn't temporary. It's a glimpse of who you really are when you're not caught up in the endless commentary of thought. May this recognition stay with you, gently guiding you back to stillness whenever life feels overwhelming. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.